Single dad boss was asleep in his bed when he came home. What she whispered changed everything. The house was supposed to be empty when Daniel Vale came home that afternoon. His 6-year-old daughter was at school, the housekeeper had already left, and Daniel had spent the entire day believing that nothing in his carefully controlled life could surprise him anymore. But the moment he pushed open the front door, he noticed something that made his heart stop. A tiny pair of unfamiliar shoes sat beside the hallway rug. A small pink backpack rested against the wall. And from upstairs, behind the half-open door of his bedroom, came the soft sound of someone whispering. Daniel froze. He had no idea who was inside his home, but then he heard a little girl's voice say something so quietly that he almost missed it. Those few words would force a lonely father to face the one truth he had spent years running from. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can change a person's life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Journey for more emotional stories that remind us that one small act of kindness can change everything. Daniel had built his life around control. At 38 years old, he was the owner of a successful architectural company in the city, a respected boss known for his sharp decisions and impossible standards. Employees admired him from a distance, but very few people truly knew him. Behind the expensive office, tailored suits, and quiet confidence was a man who had learned how to survive loss by refusing to feel anything at all. 5 years earlier, Daniel's wife had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him alone to raise their daughter, Eliana. From that day forward, Daniel had promised himself that his daughter would never feel abandoned. He worked harder than anyone, provided everything money could buy, and tried to fill every empty space in her life with security. Yet there was one thing he could never give her, the warmth of a home that felt complete. That afternoon, Daniel arrived home earlier than expected because a business meeting had been cancelled. As he stepped inside, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. His house was always quiet, but this silence felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the entire house were holding its breath. Daniel slowly walked toward the staircase, his eyes fixed on the small shoes near the entrance. He recognized the backpack immediately. It belonged to Eliana's classmate, a little girl named Maribel, who had occasionally visited their house after school. But Maribel had never come over without her mother. Daniel called his daughter's name, but there was no answer. He climbed the stairs, each step making his concern grow. When he reached the bedroom hallway, he saw the door to his bedroom slightly open. His first thought was that someone had broken into the house. His second was that Eliana might be in danger. He pushed the door open carefully, ready for the worst. Instead, what he saw left him completely speechless. His 6-year-old daughter was sitting on the edge of his bed. Beside her was Maribel, a small girl with tangled brown hair and a faded yellow sweater. Both children were staring at something beneath the blankets. Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped closer, and then he realized that someone was lying in his bed. It was a woman. She appeared exhausted. Her clothes were modest and slightly wrinkled, and her face looked pale from fatigue. One hand rested protectively near the edge of the blanket. Daniel immediately recognized her. Her name was Celeste Rowan, a temporary cleaning assistant who had been hired by the company several weeks earlier. He had seen her in the office building many times but had barely spoken to her. Daniel's voice was firm as he demanded to know what she was doing in his home. Celeste immediately tried to sit up, but she looked so weak that Eliana quickly placed a hand on her shoulder and told her to stay still. Daniel's anger shifted into confusion. Before he could ask another question, Maribel leaned toward the woman and whispered something that made the entire room go silent. She whispered that her mother had only come there because she had nowhere else to go. Daniel stared at Celeste. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Celeste quietly explained that she had not broken into the house. She had come with Eliana after school because the little girl had insisted that her mother needed help. Daniel looked at his daughter, unable to understand. Eliana had apparently discovered that Celeste had been sleeping in the storage room of an old building after losing her apartment. She had been working 2 jobs, but her wages were barely enough to survive. That morning, Celeste had become dizzy while cleaning the office and nearly collapsed. Eliana had seen her struggling and had secretly decided to bring her home. Daniel was furious that his daughter had brought a stranger into the house without permission. But before he could scold her, Eliana looked up at him with tears in her eyes and said that she was scared because Celeste reminded her of the way her own mother had looked during the last weeks of her illness. That sentence broke through Daniel's anger. He remembered something he had forgotten for years. The helplessness. The fear. The feeling of watching someone you loved become weaker while pretending everything would be okay. Daniel looked at Celeste again, and for the first time, he noticed how hard she was trying not to cry. She explained that she had accepted the temporary cleaning job because she needed money for her young daughter, who was staying with relatives in another town. She had never told anyone at the office about her situation because she was afraid that people would judge her or fire her for being distracted. She had planned to save enough money to bring her daughter back home, but then everything had gone wrong. Daniel's expression changed. He had spent years believing that people needed to prove themselves before they deserved help. Yet his daughter had looked at a struggling woman and simply decided that she deserved kindness. Daniel told Celeste that she could stay in the guest room for one night, just until she felt well enough to leave. Celeste immediately refused. She said she didn't want charity. Daniel almost responded harshly, but then he noticed Eliana watching them. His daughter was waiting to see what kind of man her father would choose to be. So Daniel took a breath and told Celeste that accepting help was not the same as accepting pity. That night, Daniel barely slept. The next morning, he learned that Celeste had left the guest room before sunrise. She had cleaned the kitchen, folded the blankets, and left a handwritten note thanking him for his generosity. Daniel found her later that morning at the office, working as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Daniel began noticing things he had ignored before. He noticed how Celeste always stayed late because she was trying to earn extra hours. He noticed how she skipped lunch to save money. He noticed the way she looked at her phone every evening, waiting for a call from her daughter. He also discovered that Celeste was not simply a cleaning assistant. She had once studied interior design and had been extremely talented, but after her husband left, she had abandoned her career to take care of her daughter. Daniel could have ignored all of this. He was busy. His company was growing. He had hundreds of employees and countless responsibilities. But he couldn't forget the way Eliana had looked at him. So Daniel offered Celeste a position in the company's design department. It was not a gift. He gave her a small project and asked her to prove herself. Celeste accepted, determined to earn every opportunity. Weeks passed, and something unexpected happened. Celeste was brilliant. Her ideas were creative, practical, and deeply human. She designed spaces that felt warm instead of merely beautiful. Daniel began trusting her judgment, and soon the woman he had once barely noticed became one of the most valuable people on his team. At home, Eliana grew closer to Celeste as well. But Daniel remained careful. He knew that his daughter had already experienced loss, and he didn't want her to become attached to someone who might disappear. Then one afternoon, Daniel received a phone call that changed everything. Celeste's daughter, Maribel, had become seriously ill and needed immediate care. Celeste was devastated. She had no money for the treatment, and she was preparing to quit her job and return to her hometown. Daniel found her sitting alone in the office parking lot, holding her phone in both hands. He asked her what she was going to do. Celeste told him she would sell everything she had, leave the city, and do whatever it took to help her daughter. Daniel understood that feeling. He remembered standing in a hospital corridor years earlier, feeling completely powerless while doctors tried to save his wife. He remembered promising himself that he would never again stand by while someone he cared about suffered alone. This time, he had a choice. Daniel arranged for Celeste's daughter to receive treatment through a charitable medical foundation supported by his company. He did not tell Celeste until everything was already approved. When she discovered what he had done, she broke down in tears. But Daniel told her that he wasn't saving her. She had already saved herself. He was simply giving her the chance to keep going. Months later, Celeste's daughter recovered and came to live with her mother. The house that had once felt cold and empty slowly changed. There were children's drawings on the refrigerator, laughter in the hallway, and the sound of two little girls playing together after school. Daniel began changing too. He no longer came home late just to avoid an empty house. He started attending Eliana's school events. He learned how to cook simple meals. He listened when his daughter talked about her day instead of checking his phone. He even began allowing himself to remember his late wife without feeling that remembering her meant he had to remain alone forever. One sunny afternoon, almost a year after the day everything began, Daniel returned home from work and found Eliana sitting beside Celeste on the front steps. The girls were drawing pictures with colored pencils while the afternoon sunlight filled the garden. Daniel stopped for a moment and watched them. He realized that his home was no longer silent. It was alive. Celeste looked up and smiled. Eliana ran toward him and wrapped her arms around his waist. Daniel closed his eyes and held his daughter tightly. Then Eliana looked up at him and whispered the same words that had changed everything months earlier. She told him that sometimes people don't need someone to rescue them. Sometimes they just need someone to notice that they are hurting. Daniel looked at Celeste. He finally understood. That day, he had thought a stranger had entered his home. But the truth was that Celeste had not entered his life to take anything from him. She had entered it to remind him that a heart could open again after years of being closed. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all was that Daniel had spent so much of his life trying to protect his daughter from loneliness that he had never realized she was the one who would teach him how to overcome his own. Years later, when people asked Daniel how his life had changed so completely, he never talked about the business success, the awards, or the company he had built. He always talked about one ordinary afternoon. An unexpected pair of shoes by the door. A little girl sitting on the edge of his bed. And a quiet whisper that reminded him that kindness doesn't always arrive with a warning. Sometimes, it simply walks through your front door. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Journey. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope, a little courage, or simply a reminder that they are not alone. And before the story ends, I have one special request for you. Comment the word kindness below if you believe that one small act of compassion can change someone's entire life. Because sometimes, the person who needs your kindness most may never ask for it. Sometimes, they may be too proud, too tired, or too afraid. But if you take the time to notice, to listen, and to care, you might become the reason someone finds the strength to begin again. And just like Daniel discovered, sometimes the greatest second chance in life is not the one we give to someone else. It is the one we finally give to ourselves.